Welcome, everybody, to How's That Working For You?
I once again have the great pleasure of introducing my wonderful podcast partner, Dr. Bryan Robinson, a man I would trust to jump into a frozen lake should I be stupid enough to skate on thin ice. You would, wouldn't you?
Well, I'd have to think about it. I'm the shrink, so we think about everything. We're not spontaneous. No, that's not really true. But of course, I would rescue you, my love. I adore you, even though you are a smarty pants.
Well,
everybody's going to see that probably today about what a smarty pants you are.
Thank you. In case you don't know.
Yep. That's right. This is my smarty pants, Monica Parker, and it's a delight to be with her. And I think she's going to talk a little bit about what our mission is.
Our mission definitely is to bring you every kind of conversation. Some of them will be funny. A lot of them are about things that we don't normally like to talk about, but that we, with Dr. Bryan Robinson's great, brilliant talents and my perspective, we hope that we can enlighten you, embolden you, and satisfy you in some way and clarify you.
That's right. And so as we're talking today, you might want to ask, how's that working for me? Or how is it not working for me, and why? And we have as our guest, Dr. Kristin Neff. It's my pleasure to introduce her. We're going to be talking about self-compassion. And Dr. Neff is actually an expert in self-compassion. It's a very simple term, but it is profound in terms of what it does for us, as you're going to see as Dr. Neff starts speaking about it. Kristin Neff is an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. I love her two books. The first one especially, as a therapist, I often have my clients read the book. It's called Self-Compassion, and there's a subtitle that is The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And it's just chock full of incredible information. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in Dr. Kristin Neff. And Kristin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Bryan and Monica. I'm really happy to be here and speak with y'all.
So let's start with this whole idea. When people hear the term self-compassion, they will often say to me, well, that sounds selfish or narcissistic. I don't think that, I think that's not something I want to do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so self-compassion is really, it's not, even though it's called self-compassion, you could just call it inner compassion, because there's actually not a lot of self in self-compassion. So when we judge ourselves and we criticize ourselves, we're really self-focused. But with self-compassion, what we're doing is we're treating ourselves like we would normally treat a friend we cared about. And so in other words, we're treating ourselves just like a flawed human being, like everyone else. So it's less self-focused. And it's not selfish, because the more compassion flows inward, the more compassion and resources we actually have available to flow outward. So people aren't used to self-compassion. They're a little suspicious of it. But the research shows it's not selfish. It won't do any of the bad things you're afraid it's going to do to you.
I always think of the oxygen mask on an airplane when it's deployed. Put it on yourself first. It helps people with the selfish part of it. But Monica, go ahead. You have a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, just to clarify, so self-compassion, it's not the same as habitual resignation, which I take to mean the acceptance of failings and, all those bad things about us. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely. So compassion really has two main expressions, which I like to call the tender and the fierce. There is an element with self-compassion where we accept ourselves as worthy as we are, flaws and all, right? And we also accept our emotions, even though they're difficult. We don't fight and rail against them in the moment, which just makes them worse. But compassion is actually about concern with the alleviation of suffering. And so even though we accept ourselves as human beings, doesn't mean we accept our behaviors or our actions or our situations, because those actually often cause suffering. So just as a parent might unconditionally love their child, as a parent, you want your kid not to engage in bad behaviors. You want them to succeed. You want them to be motivated to reach their goals in life. It's the exact same thing with self-compassion. So this is where the fierce self-compassion comes in. This means taking action to, again, motivate ourselves to make changes and to protect ourselves if we need to get out of maybe a toxic relationship or work environment, and to really do what we need to be fulfilled and happy. So it's both action and acceptance, both in the aim of alleviating our own suffering.
It's so interesting to me because I feel like we do that with children. We teach them that, and then we become adults. I think we become so much harder on ourselves, and we make the about failings. I screwed up. I failed. Instead of, this was just something. This is life. It didn't work out. This was not the right job. This was not the right guy, the right woman, whatever.
Yeah.
So the learning curve for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest findings of the research, the nice thing is there's well over 5,000 studies on self-compassion now. And so all these misconceptions have really been disproven. The number one block to self-compassion actually is the belief that it will undermine your motivation. That I need to use the whip to be really hard on myself to get myself going. But actually what we know is when it's okay to fail, in other words, when I'm okay, even if I fail, that it's not about me if I fail. It's about, what can I learn from this situation so I do better next time? It fosters a learning and growth orientation. So just as one little example, we did a study with NCAA athletes. For them, second best isn't good enough. They need to be top tier to keep their scholarships, to go into the pros. And we taught them how to be self-compassionate toward their mistakes and failures and setbacks in games or their training. So that, again, if they had a setback, it's like, it's not about me and my worth as a person. It's just about, okay, that didn't work out so well. How can I improve my game? And what we found is it did actually improve their performance. So it makes it easier to learn from your mistakes when you don't take it so personally.
I have a definition here I wanted to check out with you, Kristin, and see what you think of it. It's self-compassion has been defined as a self-attitude that involves treating oneself with warmth and understanding in difficult times, and recognizing that making mistakes is part of being human.
Yeah, I don't know if I wrote that, but it sounds good to me.
I'm not sure who wrote it, but you might have.
I probably, if you Google self-compassion, I got it early. I was the first one to define and measure it, so it's likely. But they got that one right. That's how I would define it.
Well, you know what? There's another. I read a study recently, and I know you know about the research, that says people who have self-compassion have fewer cardiovascular issues. The study's fascinating because they actually measured the linings of the arteries and found a difference in people who practice self-compassion and those who don't. Could you respond to the mind-body link between self-compassion and health?
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually maybe a little surprising finding for me when we first started realizing that it was good for your body as well as your mental health. But of course, it makes sense because they're connected. Okay, so let me give you a little physiological primer, if you don't mind. I'll try to be quick about it.
Sure.
So the reason we aren't more self-compassionate and it's easier to be compassionate to others is because when we fail or make a mistake or face a challenge, we go into threat defense mode. This is our sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, or freeze. Cortisol gets elevated, for instance, adrenaline levels raise. Our body gets inflamed because it's ready to defend ourselves because there's a threat. Now, with our friends and loved ones, we aren't so personally threatened when they fail, typically. And so we're able to use the care system, which is associated with parasympathetic response. This is about heart rate variability. It tends to lower cortisol. It tends to calm ourselves down. So that's why it feels more natural to feel like freaked out when we fail and to be supportive and compassionate when others fail. So it really operates through the nervous system, which affects the immune system, for instance. So we know we're less inflamed, and we have more heart rate variability, we have lower cortisol levels. And so that directly translates. The more we're able to tap into the care system, the parasympathetic nervous system, with ourselves in a case of failure, the better everything functions, and that leads to better physical health.
Interesting to me too that those moments when we're really frustrated and whatever that is that is amped up as opposed to being able to come down, is, I guess, the definition of self-compassion is to get over the fact that you screwed up or you made a mistake or that any of those things. So to be able to sort of just say, okay, that was a mistake. I'm moving on, and not beat yourself up. So that being able to say no to beating yourself up is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't mean that you don't take personal responsibility. So a lot of people are also afraid that forgiving yourself means, oh, well, I robbed a bank. I'm only human. It actually is just the opposite. Research shows that the more self-compassion you have for your mistakes, the more you're able to take personal responsibility and try to repair them. Because remember, this is coming from a place of care. So if you've hurt someone, first of all, if you blame and shame yourself, you're likely to just try to blame someone else if you can get away with it. But it's going to be hard to take personal responsibility because you're just spending all your resources feeling badly about yourself. But when you say, wow, I really screwed up, then actually, and you hold that, okay, that hurts. You aren't ignoring it. You aren't pretending it doesn't hurt. It hurts, especially if you've hurt someone you care about. And you kind of own that. Okay, that hurts. I made a mistake. Well, I am only human. What can I do now to move toward what I value, which is, care for this other person? So people are more likely to apologize and want to repair their mistakes when they have self-compassion.
Oh, that's so interesting. So often there are people who really struggle with apologizing and likely to say something terrible to certain males in my life. Like, I promise you, your penis won't fall off if you apologize.
That includes me, Smarty Pants, doesn't it? You know what? I want to hear your backstory. I've been really curious. I've known you for quite a while, and I've followed your work, and I'm curious about what got you into self-compassion. There must be a story there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, well, for me, it's a personal revelation. So it was actually my last year of graduate school. I was going to UC Berkeley. And I was a mess. I had just gotten a divorce. I was young. I'd gotten divorced, made a mistake. I was feeling badly about myself. And I was also really stressed about where I get a job. I'd gotten this PhD. I knew I was going to get that. The job market was really tight. Have I just wasted all this time and money? So I started practicing mindfulness meditation because I heard it was good for stress. And luckily for me, I learned mindfulness in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese teacher who always talked a lot about the importance of self-compassion. And, it took me a while to get this mindfulness thing. But the very first night I went to the course and the woman leading it talked about the importance of being, understanding and supportive and warm, kind with yourself. And so that night I went home and I said, okay, Kristin, you're feeling badly about yourself. You got a divorce. You made mistakes. You're stressed out. It's okay. I'm here for you. How could I help? And the moment I made that shift toward myself, it was so much easier to handle things. And I realized, wow, this stuff really works. And that's actually what inspired me when I finally did get a real job at UT Austin to research it. So, but for me, it still comes down to personal practice. 25 years later, I still make a lot of mistakes. I'm still fully human, but it's just more habitual for me now. As soon as I make that mistake, I feel that moment of, oh, I can't believe I did that. Then I immediately go into self-compassion. Usually first the tender and then the fierce. Well, what can I do to make things better next time?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Right.
I think Smarty Pants has a question.
Well, I do. I love that you say that we can remind ourselves those moments when we fall down, that failure is a part of sort of the shared human condition, which I think is a little bit of what you just we all make mistakes. We all fall down. And so I go back to what you just said about it's partially about forgiveness, right? Yes.
Yeah, forgiveness, but you're honing in on is what I call common humanity. So my definition of self-compassion, and other people might have different definitions, but I have a 3-component model. So first is actually mindfulness, right? We need to be able to turn toward and acknowledge that we're hurting. If we're just lost in the hurt and we're like, we don't have no perspective, we can't give ourselves compassion. Also, if we ignore it, I'm just going to stiff upper lip it, we can't give ourselves compassion. So we have to be aware of our suffering. We've got to be kind to ourselves in response as opposed to harsh or mean. But the third component is really key. I call common humanity. In other words, we frame our experience of imperfection in light of the human experience. This is so important because if we don't do that, it might be self-pity. Woe is me, poor me, my life's so terrible, or I'm uniquely flawed. And, this is why self-compassion is not self-focused. It's really just broadening our perspective to include this larger whole. And when we do that, we feel less isolated. We don't feel like it's just poor me, oh me. We feel like, okay, I'm not the only one who's felt this way. There's nothing wrong with me for making mistakes. It's kind of the plan I signed up for as a human being. And it really strengthens us by moving the focus outside of our separate self to the larger whole.
That's a great lesson for parents to teach your children. Huge.
Yep. Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up before we finish here is Monica and I took your self-compassion test. I want to know, Monica, how did you score? You go first. I'll share mine if you'll share yours.
I don't know if this is I don't know where this pushes me to, but I came up with 417. 417. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, you can't be too self-compassionate, because if you're too self-compassionate, you aren't really being self-compassionate. You're probably being self-indulgent and calling it self-compassion. Well, if you truly care about yourself, no problem. Bryan, how did you score?
3.90.
Okay, that's also quite good. Yeah, most people are about roughly 3, the midpoint of the scale. So really, the research, some colleagues of mine have said the research is so boring, Kristin, because it always comes out positive. But of course it does. Concern with the alleviation of your suffering means, and again, this is why the mindfulness is so important. You can fool yourself and think you're being self-compassionate when maybe you're just slacking, or maybe you're being self-indulgent. So you got to be clear about what's really happening. The human brain is tricky. We can distort anything. But if it's truly self-compassionate, then you're always going to make the decision that's in the direction of health and well-being. That's kind of the definition of it. So don't worry about being too self-compassionate. But you need to check, is the mindfulness there? Are you seeing clearly, or are you fooling yourself?
That's a great point. Where can our audience take this test if they want to find out whether they're self-compassionate or not?
Well, so if you just Google self-compassion, you'll find me. Selfcompassion.org is my website. You can take the test. You can do videos. And I'm also starting quite soon a self-compassion community where you can get more interaction with other people in the practice of self-compassion. So it's quite easy. It's really set up to practice.
That's great. So do you have any tips you want to leave us with?
Well, yeah. So the good news is it's actually easier to be self-compassionate than you think, because you already have the inbuilt evolutionarily provided care system. It's just it comes online for others. So if you're struggling, a very easy thing to do is just say, how would I speak to a good friend who is going through the exact same situation I'm going through? Then it can actually flow naturally. You also might use touch, which kind of triggers that care system as well. And then once you remember to give yourself compassion, it's not nearly as hard as you think it may be. So it's worth giving it a try and see what happens.
Okay.
This is great.
Yeah. I love the concept. I love the topic. And I love myself.
Me too. I want to say a little bit more towards me. You need to work on that.
I'm going to work on it because I love me, and because I love me, I love you. And I love Kristin, and I love the producer and the director, and I'm feeling a lot of love right now. It does work that way. It sounds a little hokey the way I'm saying it, but it really is inside out, right, Kristin?
Yes. So, it is possible to have one-way compassion, to just give it out and not have it come inward, but you'll be drained and depleted. But when you resource yourself, when you open your own heart with the warmth and care and support of self-compassion, it actually allows you to sustain being more compassionate to others. So it just kind of, more is better. It's
So
all good.
where can our audience find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so just selfcompassion.org. Very easy. Again, you Google it, you'll find me. And I got books and free meditations. I've got a lot of free resources.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. We hope that your takeaway is to be kinder to yourselves. And how's that working for you? Is always happy to be here to help and share. And we love you.
I want to say thank you as well. And remember, self-compassion is not selfish, it's self-care. And if we all do it, it's going to be a better world, I promise you. Also, we want to thank all of you for being here, and we want you to be kind to yourself, spread the word, and don't forget to follow us on our YouTube channel. And we hope you will be here for the next episode of How's That Working For You?